Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new, welcome. I'm Alexa Allen, and each week I talk about a new true crime, conspiracy, or mystery. Last week we talked about the Circleville letters, and if you guys haven't got a chance to watch that yet, I'll link it up here. It's kind of a classic whodunit case. I just want to take a second and say thank you so much to all the essential workers out there doing what they can to keep society functioning in a very different way, but yet still functioning, and especially the healthcare workers who are risking a lot for us right now. So this week's case is a frustrating one because although it's considered solved, it still is very much unsolved to many. So first I'm going to go over the story of Cindy James, and then I'm going to get into some theories with you guys and let you know what I think. Cynthia Elizabeth James was born in 1944 in Vancouver, British Columbia. She was the oldest of 6 children, and she had a fairly normal upbringing and a good relationship with her parents. When Cindy was 19, she met Dr. Roy Makepeace, who was a psychiatrist. He was 18 years her senior, and they would go on to marry. Personally, I think it's a little strange that a guy in his late 30s would be dating a teenager, especially a psychiatrist. This seems a little off to me. Cindy graduated nursing school in 1966, and she became a nurse. She also had a second job counseling children. Cindy really loved children, and her heart was completely in that second job. Cindy's marriage to Roy ended in 1982, and 4 months after her divorce, Cindy started receiving some pretty disturbing phone calls. Cindy said that sometimes these phone calls would be someone whispering, sometimes it was a man's voice, and sometimes it was just silence. Cindy would even get these calls when she had company over, and the witnesses said they heard the phone ring and then no one would be on the other line. So this all soon escalated, and it got even more intense than just phone calls. She got her porch light smashed, people throwing rocks at her windows, and even cutting her phone lines. Then Cindy began to get threatening notes on her doorstep. They said things like, "Soon, Cindy," and "I see you." One night, Cindy had company over playing cards, and the burglar alarm went off, and they looked around the house and went downstairs into the basement, and they discovered that one of the windows was smashed open. Cindy was obviously terrified. She confided in her friends and family and said she thought whoever was doing this wasn't setting out to physically harm her, but they wanted to actually scare her to death. So on January 27th, 1983, Cindy's good friend Agnes Woodcock comes over to her house for a visit. Agnes knocked on the door and she didn't get an answer, so she figured that Cindy was taking her nightly bath. That's something that Cindy did every night. But then Agnes heard something. Agnes went around out back to see what the noise was, and she found Cindy back there with a nylon stocking wrapped around her neck, laying on the ground. Sydney told Agnes that she was going out to the garage to get something, and someone came from behind her, and she doesn't remember anything else, but all she saw was the white sneakers that they were wearing. Now, after this attack, Cindy was terrified. Cindy changed her last name, moved into a new house, painted her car, and hired a private investigator. Now, at this point, Cindy had been reporting these incidences to the police, but they weren't really getting far, so Cindy was ready to take things into her own hands by hiring this private investigator. And on the subject of the police investigation, they were sort of suspicious of Cindy. They weren't getting very far, things weren't exactly adding up, and when they questioned her, they said it seemed like she was withholding information. Cindy's mother would later say that Cindy confided in her that on one of these attacks, because there were multiple, her attacker told her that if she told anyone about this, her mother and her sister would be next. So Cindy's mother believes that this was the information that Cindy was withholding to the police. So Cindy's private investigator, his name is Ozzy Caban, he gives her some searchlights for around the house, some sensor lights that turn on if anyone's in the yard, and he also gives her a CB, because remember, Cindy's phone lines were cut, so he wanted to make sure she had a backup plan if this happened again. So on January 30th, 1984, Ozzy hears distressing noise coming from the CB radio, and he's not getting a response from Cindy, so he rushes over to her house. Cindy's door was locked and she wasn't answering, so Ozzy's going around the house and trying to look in the windows to see if he can find her. He ends up seeing Cindy passed out on the floor with a paring knife stabbed through her hand, and they would later find that the paring knife had a note stabbed into her hand and it said, "Now you must die." So Cindy's rushed to the hospital and she says all she can remember is being hit by something in the head, and she remembered something sharp being poked into her arm. Police search the house and they find no forced entry and no fingerprints anywhere. The police at some point start sending people to surveil Cindy's house because she's getting attacked, and these calls and harassment, all of it keeps going and going. They send out a team of officers to surveil the house. Sometimes they even have up to 14 officers watching her house. But these calls never come. No one ever shows up when these cops are around. The cops see this as suspicious, again, blaming it on Cindy staging all of this herself. But I think if someone's stalking you, they're gonna know if there's cop cars watching your house, right? I mean, even if they're undercover, like, they're gonna know your daily routine and the routine of the area and who lives around you. Like, they're gonna recognize there's a strange car outside your house. So on December 11th, 1985, we're years into this thing now. This is still going on. Cindy is found 6 miles from her house in a ditch, semi-conscious, and she's wearing a men's work glove and a work boot. She's suffering from hypothermia, and she has cuts and bruises covering her whole body. She also, again, has a nylon stocking wrapped around her neck with no memory of what happened. So Cindy's friend Agnes from time to time would spend the night at Cindy's house with her husband Tom, just to kind of keep an eye on Cindy and make sure she's okay. And one night while they're staying there, Cindy comes in the middle of the night, and she's frantic, and she says, "I heard someone downstairs." They all go downstairs to check it out. The basement is in flames, and Agnes goes to call the police, but the phone lines are dead. Tom runs outside to see if he can use a neighbor's phone, and there's a man standing outside of the house, and he says to the man, "Can you call the fire department?" But the man runs away. Again, police suspect that Cindy staged this event. There's no sign of forced entry, and it appears that the fire started from inside the house. And the only window that the person could have got in, I guess, to start the fire in this room still had a layer of dust on the windowsill, so they figured they didn't climb in because they would have disturbed that dust. Another thing that the police thought was sort of strange was the fact that Cindy said the reason that she heard someone downstairs was because she was getting up to go bring her dog for a walk. Now, this was at 3 a.m, and they thought it was a little strange if someone has been harassing you all this time and attacking you, that you would go out by yourself to walk your dog in the middle of the night. Cindy's doctors become really concerned that Cindy is suicidal, and they do send her to the psychiatric ward for 10 weeks. And that's a long time to be in there. So we can kind of deduct that Cindy was really having a hard time. After her hospital stay, she apparently tells her father that she knows who's doing this, and if the police aren't going to figure it out, she's going to take care of it herself. On May 25th, 1989, Cindy goes missing. Her car is found that day in a parking lot with groceries and a wrapped gift inside. There was blood on the driver's side door, and items from her wallet were under the car. 2 weeks later, Cindy's body was found in an abandoned house. Her hands and feet were bound behind her back, and a nylon stocking was wrapped tightly around her neck. Now, at first they thought the cause of death was strangulation, but an autopsy revealed that it was actually a morphine overdose. It was estimated that Cindy had been dead for about 6 days, so she was missing 2 weeks, and those other 8 days were unaccounted for. So, police file Cindy's death as a suicide. They had proved that it is possible to tie your own hands behind your back the way she did, and they think that she took morphine tablets rather than an injection because the morphine tablets would take longer to take effect, giving her time to tie herself up like she did. So for those that believe that Cindy's death was not a suicide, there's 3 suspects in this case. One of them is Cindy's ex-husband, Roy Makepeace. So Roy, as you know, was a psychiatrist. Roy claimed after Cindy had passed that he thought she was mentally ill. He believed that she did this herself as well. Roy thought that Cindy was suffering from multiple personality disorder, or what we call today dissociative identity disorder. He believed that Cindy wouldn't willfully put her parents and her family and friends through all of this, and that it was a mental illness that was causing her to play all of this out. Now, this is not verified information, but I think it's worth mentioning. So according to Cindy's sister, she had received an email saying that Cindy and her husband Roy went on a vacation shortly before their divorce. They visited a friend of Roy's in the Gulf Islands, and allegedly Cindy witnessed her husband and this friend kill and dispose of a body. So some people think it's possible that this is true. Cindy did witness this, and Roy tried to make it look like Cindy was crazy and killed her in the end so that all of her claims would be unbelievable. Now, the second suspect is Officer Pat Mcbride. Pat Mcbride was one of the police officers assigned to Cindy's case. He was one of the people that helped surveil the house, and at some point he started a relationship with Cindy. He even moved in with her and had a key to her house. Cindy declined a proposal from him, and eventually their relationship ended. But years later, Pat was charged with sexual assault, and one of his victims testified that he said to her, "You remind me of Cindy." Now, the third suspect is that man that was standing outside of the house during the fire and just ran away when Tom asked him for help. Now, I am curious if Tom knew what Officer McBride looked like at that time, if that could have been him and Tom just didn't know, and it could just be the same suspect, Pat McBride, and this random observer of the fire that night. So this is a really hard one. Unfortunately, I do think that Cindy might have been suffering from a mental illness. She filed over 100 reports over 6.5 years, and $1.5 million was spent on her case through the police department, and they never even had one suspect. I did hear one recording of a phone call that was made to Cindy's ex-husband by the alleged stalker, and I'll link that down below. To me, it does sound like a woman disguising her voice to sound like creepy or manly. It's really disturbing, but I do think it could have been Cindy calling. I do think it's possible that Cindy's ex-husband was correct in his diagnosis of DID. That incident where she was found on the highway with the men's work boot and glove kind of sticks out to me. Could that have been one of her alters, a male alter that performed the violence on her and kind of tried to dress himself like a man? It's also possible that there was a stalker at some point, and because the police weren't believing her, Cindy kind of did more to make it seem like it was a bigger deal, to be taken more seriously, because obviously she wasn't being taken seriously. I'm not 100% sold that she had a mental illness. I definitely think there's a possibility she could have had a stalker, but for the most part, I do lean towards mental illness, just because if she did have a stalker, they would have really, really had to have been so professional and so vigilant to do the 6.5 years and never get caught. But either way, no matter what you think, Cindy was a victim. This is such a sad case, and it's really unfortunate that we just don't know. I am curious to know what you guys think about this case. Let me know your thoughts. I mean, there are a lot of different ways this could go. Thank you guys so much for stopping by. Stay safe, and I'll see you next time.